It's strange, isn't it? How a place built on noise and chaos can feel so incredibly empty. For months, the blue brand, the entire landscape of WWE, had felt incomplete. There was noise, yes. There were champions. There were contenders. There were matches that made the crowd stand up. But there was no royalty. The throne sat empty, covered in dust, while pretenders fought over scraps in the courtyard. The current champion, full of fire and vinegar, held the title high every week, proclaiming a new era. An era free from the shadows of the past. An era where the old guard was just that, old and gone. The fans, they tried to believe it. They wanted to invest in the new. But every time the lights dimmed, every time a new challenger emerged, there was a collective, unspoken breath held. A hope for a different silhouette. A hope that was dashed week after week. Until it became accepted. The Queen was gone. The chapter was closed. The kingdom had seemingly moved on. The narrative was set. SmackDown was heading into its biggest show of the year, and the main event felt predictable, safe. The story was already written. The air in the arena that night was thick with expectation, but for the wrong reasons. The fans were ready for the scheduled main event. They were ready to cheer the hero and boo the villain. It was routine. It was the comfortable, predictable rhythm of professional wrestling. The current champion was in the ring, her voice echoing with an arrogance that only comes from believing your own hype. She spoke of her dominance, of how she had single-handedly erased the old generation. She laughed at the very idea of competition. She said the throne was hers, that she had melted down the old crown to forge her new one. And as she spoke, the camera would pan across the faces in the crowd. They were cheering, but it was hollow. They were reacting, but they weren't feeling. They were spectators at a show, not participants in a moment. Backstage, producers in headsets called their shots, looking at their carefully planned-out timelines. Everything was on schedule. Everything was fine. But the universe, especially the WWE Universe, abhors a vacuum. And the space left behind by Charlotte Flair wasn't just a vacuum. It was a wound. A wound the champion was currently pouring salt into, unaware that the body was about to react. Backstage, her name was a ghost story. Charlotte. It wasn't spoken in production meetings. It wasn't written on whiteboards. To mention her was to acknowledge the giant, queen-shaped hole in the roster, and that wasn't good for business. Business was about the next, the new. But in the locker room, it was different. The other competitors, they felt her absence. For some, it was relief. The path to the title was suddenly clear, the final boss removed from the game. For others, it was a quiet frustration. How could you prove you were the best, if the best wasn't there to be beaten? The whispers were always the same. Did you hear from her? Is she even watching? They say she's done. They say she's happy. This absence wasn't an injury. It wasn't a suspension. It was a choice. She had simply vanished, walked away from the spotlight, from the pressure, from the legacy she was born to uphold. And that's what made the rumors so potent. She hadn't been defeated. She had abdicated. And in the world of kings and queens, an abdication is a surrender. The roster, the fans, the company, they had all begun to believe it. She was history. The champion was mid-sentence, her voice reaching a smug crescendo. And no one, living or dead, can ever... Her microphone cut. The arena plunged into a sudden, suffocating darkness. It wasn't a production glitch. This silence was different. It was heavier. The crowd's roar died in their throats, turning into a confused murmur. You could hear a single "what" echo from the balcony. And then, a sound. Not music. A low synthetic hum. A vibration. Woo. A single ghostly woo echoed, detached from anything human. The champion froze. She looked left, then right, her bravado shattering like glass. The Titantron, previously black, flickered, and then it exploded. Not with a video, but with pure, blinding, liquid gold light. Fire blasted from the stage, hot and violent. The entire arena was bathed in this royal, oppressive gold, and through the smoke, a silhouette. No one expected Charlotte Flair to walk through that curtain again, but when she did, the entire arena stood still. The music finally crashed, that iconic, arrogant, beautiful theme. The collective gasp of 20,000 people was sucked out of the building, replaced by a roar that wasn't just loud. It was emotional. It was relief. It was shock. It was history. She didn't run. She didn't pump her fists. She didn't play to the crowd. Charlotte Flair simply walked. Each step was a judgment. The golden light followed her, treating her like the center of the universe. She wore a robe that seemed woven from the very concept of arrogance, dripping with crystals that caught the light and scattered it like diamonds. Her eyes were fixed, not on the fans, not on the cameras, but on the one thing in the ring that mattered. The champion, who seconds ago had declared herself an icon, was now a portrait of human fear. She hadn't backed into a corner. She was trapped in the center. She held the championship belt, but she wasn't holding it like a weapon. She was holding it like a shield. Like a child clutching a teddy bear in a thunderstorm. Charlotte reached the bottom of the ramp. She paused. She looked at the crowd, who were losing their minds, and a small, almost imperceptible smirk crossed her face. Then, she ascended the steps, slowly, purposefully. She stepped through the ropes, and the ring, which had been the champion's entire world, suddenly became Charlotte's domain. The Queen was home. The cameras for a moment stayed on the ring, the standoff, the silent transfer of power. But the real story, the immediate consequence, was happening backstage. We, the viewers, didn't see it, but we could feel it. The sound of a producer screaming into a headset, "Who cleared this? Get a camera on her! Get a camera on everyone!" The general manager, who had just been sitting in his office sipping coffee, was now sprinting towards the gorilla position, his face pale. The script for the rest of the show? It was shredded, torn up, useless. And then there was the locker room, the other women who had been clawing and scratching for that champion spot. They weren't cheering. They were watching a monitor in stunned silence. Their plans, their ambitions, their entire career trajectories. All of it vaporized in a single blast of golden pyro. The line had just been reset, and the Queen, without saying a word, had just walked past every single one of them and placed herself at the very front. This wasn't a return, it was a coup. The whole ecosystem, so carefully balanced, had just been thrown into absolute beautiful chaos. Within 30 seconds, it was the #1 trend, worldwide, not just in wrestling, in everything. Charlotte was all that mattered. News outlets that hadn't covered wrestling in years were scrambling to write articles. The Queen returns. Flair shakes WWE to its core. The online pundits, the insiders, who had confidently reported that she was unhappy and likely done, were now furiously deleting their old posts. The media storm wasn't just a buzz. It was a tsunami that reshaped the entire narrative. The champion she was confronting, she was already an asterisk. The new era she had been bragging about, it was now just a footnote in the real story. Charlotte's story. This is the Flair effect. It's not just about winning matches. It's about gravity. She bends the entire sport to her will, just by showing up. The company's stock value, the network's ratings, the price of admission for next week's show, all of it changed. She hadn't wrestled, she hadn't spoken. She had simply arrived. And in doing so, she reminded the world that while many can play the game, very, very few can change it. To understand why the return was so shocking, you have to understand why she left. And to understand that, you have to understand the name, Flair. That name is a blessing, and it is a crushing, inescapable curse. It means you are born into royalty. It means the red carpet is rolled out for you. But it also means that carpet is soaked in the expectations of a legend. Every match, Every promo, every single second she is on screen, she is not just being compared to her opponents. She is being compared to an idea. She is being compared to her father, Ric Flair, a man who is arguably the greatest to ever do it. Imagine that. Imagine waking up every day knowing that great isn't good enough. You have to be transcendent. Her absence, the one no one could explain, wasn't about money or injuries. It was about air. She had to leave the shadow to see if she could breathe on her own. She had to escape the woo, the robes, the gold, all of it, to find out who Ashley Flair was when she wasn't Charlotte Flair. This wasn't a sabbatical. It was an escape from the monster of perfection she had created. Think about the pressure. 14-time champion, main event of WrestleMania, constantly being told you are the standard. That standard becomes a prison. Every match had to be 5 stars. Every promo had to be a headline. If she failed, if she had an off night, it wasn't just a failure. It was a betrayal of the name. It was proof that she wasn't, in fact, her father's daughter. So she walked away. She chose silence. She chose peace. And in that silence, she must have learned something profound. She must have realized that the shadow wasn't just behind her. It was part of her. She learned that Ashley and Charlotte weren't two different people at war. They were one. She didn't have to live up to her father's legacy. She was too busy building her own. Her return wasn't just about reclaiming a championship. It was the end of her own internal civil war. The Queen hadn't just returned to WWE. She had returned to herself, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The following week, the chaos had settled into a tense, cold silence. The champion had spent all week on social media, screaming about how she was unafraid and disrespected. But now, Charlotte was in the ring, alone, and she had a microphone. The crowd was electric, but she motioned for silence. And she got it. She didn't yell. She didn't brag. She didn't pander. She spoke with the quiet, terrifying calm of absolute certainty. She said she had watched from afar. She had watched them play in her sandbox, breaking her toys. She had watched a new era be proclaimed, and she found it adequate. "I didn't come back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "to be in the new era. I am the era." She looked directly into the camera, as if speaking to every other person in the locker room. "I didn't come back to get in line. I am the line. And I didn't come back for a championship. I came back to collect my championship." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. A simple, cold, royal decree. But here is the part no one saw. Here is the move that truly defines the Queen. We all saw the shock. We saw the chaos. We saw the terrified producers and the stunned champion. We assumed this was a surprise to everyone. We assumed she had gone rogue. But what if we were wrong? What if the chaos was the point? The story ends, but the real story begins. Picture this. Days before her return. A dark office, far from the arena. Charlotte, not in a robe, but in a power suit, sits across from the highest level executives, the ones who pull the strings. They had been negotiating her return for months, but she wouldn't sign. She wanted everything. Control, the main event, the undisputed top spot, and they wouldn't give it. So she let them go. She let SmackDown become predictable. She let the new era become fine. She waited until they needed her, until the show felt hollow. Her return wasn't a surprise. It was a negotiation. The fire, the gold, the shock on everyone's faces. That was her leverage. She didn't just return to take the throne. She returned to prove to the kingmakers that she, and only she, owned the entire kingdom. The checkmate had happened long before she ever stepped through the curtain.